Alright guys, Necromancy has arrived in RS3, and I just wanted to make a quick video coming from the perspective of I've played a lot of RS3, but I would definitely say that I am primarily an old school player, and I kind of had a lot of PVM fear in RS3, just because the combat system is very daunting coming from someone who has played primarily old school and legacy combat styles and revolution since I was little. But with the release of Necromancy, I feel that has changed. Necromancy has made me feel a lot more confident in my abilities with PVMing. It feels like it is designed to ease people into learning full manual combat, and I think it is a fantastic point to jump in if you are an old school player. Right now is the time to do it. So to get into why Necromancy is so good for new players and people learning combat, we really need to get into how the skill works. So just from a base level, before we start anything else, Necromancy always has a 100% accuracy everywhere. So you will still see numbers for accuracy that are below 100 on monsters, but the way that Necromancy works is that's not an actual accuracy chance. That is how much damage that target is taking from your Necromancy abilities. So you will always still hit, even if something says it has like a 30% hit chance, you will just be doing 30% of your total damage. It makes it feel a lot more consistent. It does not feel as bad as missing 70% of your attacks, because when you fire off a powerful threshold, it's not doing 0% because you missed, it's just doing 30% of what it potentially could. So the next thing that I really think does help a lot is having a auto attack that is relatively strong, comparable to the other styles, and also will automatically fire. You can change that in your settings, but I personally have not seen a reason to. It's relatively powerful, generates 9% adrenaline, does an average of 100% necromancy damage. It is alright, and it will be up every 2 ticks, every 1.2 seconds, every global cooldown. And it is just a relatively good normal ability that is reliable and will always be up, so you will never have downtime even if you are doing full manual, if you have this set to auto cast. On top of that, the other two basic abilities that you will be casting relatively frequently do have somewhat low cooldown compared to the other skills. Touch of Death is a little bit longer at 14.4 seconds, but Soul Sap is up every 5.4 seconds, so that's every, I believe, 3 attacks that you can fire off a Soul Sap, which is going to be pretty essential to building up stacks, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The third reason that Necromancy is very good for people learning PVM are the conjures. These are abilities that it's sort of like summoning another familiar, but they do hit a lot harder, and they last a lot shorter, obviously, than like a summoning pouch. The primary benefit of these abilities is that they are like set it and forget it. All you have to do is summon a skeleton or a ghost or a zombie, and it will just hit stuff. There are abilities for each that you can use beyond that, but most people I've seen are only really using the skeleton's second ability because it doesn't cost adrenaline, and it is just a very powerful ability. As of right now, I'm not confident in saying that this is like something you should hold on to, because Jagex has talked about changing this, but you can cast these abilities out of combat and it does not have an adrenaline cost. So what people are doing is casting the ghost and then the ghost second ability before they even enter combat, because it does give them a little bit bonus damage, but the 70% adrenaline cost is just not really worth it while you're in combat. But that's for later. It's a little bit more complicated. So that is a pretty basic overview of Necromancy in combat. We're going to start going a little bit more in depth. If everything sounds good to you right now, honestly, I do recommend just going in and trying it. This is the first time that RS3 has had a good combat tutorial. Every ability, as you unlock it, will pull up a tooltip. It will tell you what the ability does, when you use it situationally, all this good information that is not available for the other skills. genuinely, I do recommend just trying it. But if you need a little bit more convincing, we're going to go more into how the skill works. So in the tutorial of Necromancy, you will unlock Conjure Skeleton Warrior. That is your first Conjure ability. So for the first few levels, you are stuck with your basic attack and your skeleton auto attacks. At level 8, you unlock Finger of Death, which is your first ability that costs adrenaline. For those of you who are not familiar with RS3's combat, it's sort of like special attack energy in old school, but you do build it up by attacking, so you get it back a lot faster. That being said, Finger of Death is a 60% adrenaline cost, so it will use 60% of your spec bar every single time you use it, which means it feels not that great when you first unlock it. 60% adrenaline is a lot. It takes, I would say, probably about 10 seconds to build that back up, which is a lot in RS3. It's a lot of time. And it does do a lot of damage, but it just feels like it is not worth it. That is remedied at level 13 when you unlock Touch of Death. Touch of Death is the first of 2 unique buffs that you gain when using Necromancy, and this is going to sound very complicated, but I promise it flows very well once you're actually doing the combat. So what Touch of Death is going to do is give you 4 stacks of Necrosis. It's going to show up on your buff bar as a green little skull thing. Now what these stacks do is every single stack reduces the adrenaline cost of Finger of Death by 10%. That's its only function right now. It gains functionality later. We'll talk about it. So with just that level 13 unlock, now Finger of Death becomes a much more reliable ability. It feels much more worth using. So at this point, you'll just be playing around with these new abilities until you hit level 28, which is when you unlock the first ultimate that Necromancy has, which is called Death Skulls. So what Death Skulls does is it is a 100% adrenaline cost, so you have to use your entire special attack bar, and it will bounce between up to 4 targets, including yourself. It can bounce back to you, but it won't do damage to you. It's mainly just for if there's no enemies in range. And this ability just does massive damage. So at this point, you're going to realize, okay, I want to be using my adrenaline on Death Skulls, which means I don't want to be casting Finger of Death without Necrosis stacks. At level 40, you will unlock your other 2 conjure spells, the Putrid Zombie and the Vengeful Ghost. At this point, you can only have one of them conjured at a time, but you do unlock 2 active conjures at level 52, you unlock 3 at, I believe, 92, and then you unlock 4, which is not even available to use yet. That just shows that Jagex is planning more expansion with this skill, but you can unlock 4 active conjures at level 106. At level 44, you get the Threads of Fate incantation. What that does is it causes any single target Necromancy ability to become multi-target. It hits up to 5 targets, and this is incredibly strong for clearing larger groups of enemies, because what Necromancy does have in spades is a lot of single target damage in bursts. So moving on, you had heard me mention earlier Soul Sap. At level 54, we get Soul Sap and Soul Strike, which unlocks our second unique Necromancy. So Soul Sap will give you 1 stack of this buff, and Soul Strike consumes 1 stack of this buff. You need to have a stack of Soul Sap to cast Soul Strike. So what Soul Strike does is it is a single target ability. It will hit the target and then explode in a 3x3 area around it and stun everything within that radius. This is compounded on at level 66 with the ability Volley of Souls, which you can use in place of Soul Strike or just situationally over Soul Strike. What this one does is it requires at least 2 stacks of this buff, and it will just use up all of them. However many stacks you have, it'll use all of them and do a huge chunk of damage for each stack to 1 target. And with just that number of abilities, it's really not that many compared to the other skills. With just that number of abilities, we have a pretty well-defined playstyle for Necromancy, where you are slowly building up your Necrosis stacks over time with Touch of Death because it has a nearly 15-second cooldown, and in between that you are building up your Soul Sap stacks and launching Volley of Souls to deal damage in the in-between. while still keeping your conjures up, having them deal damage, and occasionally using something like Threads of Fate to clear larger groups of enemies. One last skill that I forgot to mention, just because it's a passive that's up all the time that I never really think about, but you have the Bone Shield incantations, which effectively just mean you don't need to hold a shield for some defensive abilities that do normally require you to hold a shield. This just makes a lot of PVMing a lot smoother, where you don't have to swap to a shield, then use the ability, do significantly reduced damage because you're not dual wielding or two-handing something for a brief period of time, and then switch off of your shield back to your main hand once the defensive has finished. So anyway, that doesn't cover everything that Necromancy has to offer. Again, I was only going over the combat stuff. There is like a whole skilling side to this skill, and that will unlock a lot of your abilities. You do have to do the skilling to unlock some of these. But I hope that I was able to convince at least a few of you to go try out Necromancy in RS3. If you seemed at all interested in any of this, I highly recommend it. It has been opening new worlds of PVM for me. I've been doing stuff that I never thought that I could do, was too scared to do with the other skills, and it has just been a fantastic time. If you guys have any questions about how to get started, other things to do in RS3, just let me know. I don't plan on this leaving my little circle of influence, or rather James's little circle of influence. So I'm sure that all of you guys know where to find me on Discord. My in-game name in RS3 is JuiceBoxRS3. So yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.